How you doing? This is my mom's 1996 RAV4, and I'm going to be doing some brake work on it today. Plan is to replace the front discs and rotors, as well as, to replace the front rotors and brake pads, and in the back to replace the brake shoes because they are getting thin. Never done it before. I've done brake work on a Tacoma and a newer Camry hybrid. So I'm hoping that this isn't going to be dramatically different. I'm going to try to document it the best I can. Okay, now I have the front wheels off the vehicle. So you can tell the old rotors are kind of old and rusty. My mom doesn't drive this vehicle a whole lot, so there's quite a big accumulation of rust on here. I'm pretty sure these are the original rotors as well. So I'm going to be popping the caliper off here, and right here are your brake shoes. And once I get that off, we'll see how tough it is to get the rotor off. Hopefully not that hard. Okay, there's two bolts that hold on the caliper. It's a 14mm bolt. Right there's the one. You see I slipped the caliper back. The other one is here. Hopefully you can see that. So I'm going to remove that one. Once it's removed, I will be tying this caliper assembly up around the strut. To make sure there's no tension on this brake line here, because it could tear if you just let the weight of the caliper hang on it. I'm also going to be, before reinstalling the caliper, I will be compressing this piston in to make room for the new pads. So I'm going to do those steps and show you the after shot. Okay, I have the caliper out of the way right now. It's hung by the strut. I also wanted to mention as far as darn compressor. Anyways, I wanted to mention as far as jacking up the vehicle. I have a floor jack on either side. I also have a jack stand underneath it for safety, and just as a third layer of defense, I happen to have the tire partially under the vehicle, just in case it would fall. You know, it wouldn't crush anything, except the tire. Also, when removing the caliper here, down here, like I said, it's a 14mm bolt, but then you need a 17mm wrench to hold this side when you actually remove the caliper. Next up, I will be removing the pads, which should just slide out. Yeah, those pads don't look horribly worn. And then also I will be removing the bracket that holds caliper right here. Okay, there's the caliper bracket. I removed it. There was two 17mm screws that hold that on. I took a big box wrench and kind of tapped it with a hammer because those are on pretty tight. These slide pins, these pull out. It's kind of hard to do with one hand. These pull out, and you're supposed to lubricate them before you put them back in. I have some high temperature brake grease that I'll be using to do that. But at this point, I'm going to see if I can get the actual rotor off the car. Okay, I have the old rotor off. Took some banging with a hammer on the back of it. Luckily, I don't need to reuse that rotor because it would have all kinds of dents in it. Here's the new rotor. Okay, turn the air compressor off. Here's a new rotor. When you get these brand new, they're covered with a oily solution that's used to prevent the fresh metal from rusting. You have to clean that off, so I'm going to be taking it out of the bag and spraying it with brake clean. And thoroughly cleaning it to get all of the residue off, otherwise you will contaminate the brake pads, the new brake pads. So I'm going to do that next. Okay, I have the new rotor loosely on there. Next I'll be reattaching the caliper bracket. I took both of these bolts here out and applied some more of the brake grease to them to make sure that they slide back and forth easily. So let me get the bracket back on and we'll get this thing back together. Alright, here's my new brake pads. I opted for the more expensive ones. The guy at the counter told me that these come with the hardware already, because usually they recommend that you replace these clips with it. And here the hardware that it comes with is just the bolts to hold the caliper on, and a retention spring that this doesn't even use. These pads do come with a rubber backing. A lot of times the backing on the cheaper pads is metal and you put grease on them, but I don't think it was worth the extra money. I would have been better off just getting the cheaper pads and buying a hardware kit separately, especially considering how little my mom drives. But live and learn. So anyways, I have the one pad back in. I'm going to put the other one back in, and at that point then we'll be ready to compress the caliper. Alright, here's a view from the front with the new pads in place. I don't have the rotor isn't on tight yet, so it's a little sloppy. Up here is the caliper. What I'm going to be doing is removing or loosening the reservoir for the brake fluid, and then applying a C-clamp to compress this piston in. What that will do is allow me to get additional clearance to get the piston and caliper assembly over the new pads, because they're thicker than the ones that were pulled out. And if all goes as planned, it'll slide right back on there. And just so you get an idea of what I'm doing, so right here you'll see the before I compress it. Okay, here you can see how I have the C-clamp attached. I have the old brake pad on top of the caliper, and then I compress the C-clamp until it will go no further. And as you can see, the piston is now flush with the caliper body, so it should be a lot easier to get back over the pads. The old pads did not have these springs on them. These are designed to put outward pressure on the pads when you're not on the brakes, so they're not rubbing against the disc. They came with the new pads, so I figure I might as well put them on. Can't hurt. If anything, should help extend the life of the pads. So the new brake pads also gave me two new 14mm bolts, so put them on. Yeah, why not? I have them. Going to tighten them up again. This bigger bolt in here is a 17mm. You need a 17mm box wrench to hold that while you tighten this 14mm bolt. Okay, I took a couple lug nuts and seated them all the way onto the threads to push the disc all the way onto the bolts, and the wheel feels like it's spinning normally. Disc looks like it's, or the rotor looks like it's straight. So now I'm going to basically repeat the procedure on the other side. Will be no different, and after I'm done with that, I'll come back for the final adjustments. Okay, I just finished the driver's side. It's no different than the passenger side, except you're just pushing the opposite direction to get the bolts loose. Went fine. I'm going to push the brake fluid reservoir cap back on right here, make sure it's on tight. And I'm going to get in the vehicle and push the brake pedal down several times. First time it should go to the floor, and it does. And you just pump it a few times, and that will, now it's back up at a nice high position. That will reseat the pads. And then at this point I'm going to take a test drive and make sure it feels good, no more pulsing, strong stops, and we'll be good to go. Okay, just took it out for a test drive. The pulsation is gone. The vehicle stops smoothly. It's not noisy. Feels much better. So I would tentatively call this a successful rotor and pad change on a 1996 Toyota Rav 4. If you guys found this interesting, you can tune in for my rear brake shoe video that I'm going to be shooting next.